The first time Grace Miller saw Luca Moretti, he was bleeding onto her hospital floor with a gunshot wound in his side, 3 dead men outside the ambulance bay, and the entire emergency room frozen under lockdown. Rain slammed against the glass doors of St. Aurelia Medical Center like someone trying to break in from the sky. Red emergency lights washed over the hallway. Nurses whispered prayers. Security guards held trembling hands near useless radios. And the man on the gurney, the one everyone suddenly refused to touch, opened his eyes and looked directly at Grace, as if the chaos belonged to him. His voice was calm, low, almost gentle. "You're not afraid enough," he said. Grace pressed both hands against the blood pouring from his wound and answered, "Then stop talking and try not to die." For 3 years, Grace had worked the night shift in one of Chicago's busiest emergency departments. She had treated drunk businessmen, gang kids, overdose victims, frightened mothers, politicians hiding scandals, and police officers who pretended they weren't scared. She knew fear. She knew blood. She knew the strange silence that came before death entered a room, but she had never felt anything like the silence that followed Luca Moretti's name. The moment one of the paramedics whispered it, every person nearby stepped back. Luca Moretti, the head of the Moretti family, the man whose name moved money, buried enemies, and made hardened criminals lower their eyes. Grace did not step back. She cut open his shirt with trauma shears and found expensive black fabric soaked red. He watched her hands, not with panic, but with fascination, as if pain was an inconvenience and she was the only thing in the room worth studying. "You need surgery," she said, "and you need to stop looking at me like that." His mouth barely moved, but something almost like amusement touched his face. "Like what?" Grace leaned closer, pressing harder against the wound. "Like you own the room." Luca's eyes shifted to the armed police at the door, the panicked staff, the locked-down corridor, then back to her. "I do." Before Grace could respond, gunfire erupted outside the emergency entrance. Everyone dropped. Grace covered Luca's body by instinct, not because he deserved it, not because she knew him, but because he was her patient. Glass shattered somewhere down the hall. A nurse screamed. The hospital intercom crackled with a lockdown warning. Luca's hand caught Grace's wrist, not tight enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her from moving. His fingers were cold from blood loss. "Stay behind me," he said. Grace stared at him in disbelief. "You're bleeding out." His expression did not change. "I've done worse things with less blood." That was the first thing about him she would never forget. Even half dead, Luca Moretti spoke like danger was something he could negotiate with. Grace got him into Trauma Bay 3 while the hospital descended into panic. Armed men had attacked the ambulance that brought him in, then vanished into the rain. Police sealed the exits. Staff were trapped inside. Luca's men arrived minutes later, not loudly, not recklessly, but like shadows in tailored coats. Black SUVs blocked the street outside. Men with earpieces filled the lobby. The hospital suddenly felt less like a place of healing and more like neutral ground in a war nobody had warned her about. Through it all, Grace worked. She pushed medication, barked orders, controlled the bleeding, and refused to let anyone intimidate her out of doing her job. When one of Luca's men tried to enter the trauma bay with a gun visible under his coat, Grace snapped, "You bring that weapon one step closer to my patient and I'll have security drag you out." The man looked at Luca, waiting. Luca, pale and bleeding, gave the smallest nod. The man stepped back. That was the second thing Grace would remember. Everyone feared him, but for reasons she did not understand, he listened to her. The surgery team arrived late because the lockdown had sealed 2 floors. Grace stayed with Luca longer than she should have. She held pressure. She monitored his vitals. She told him to stay awake when his eyes began to drift. At one point, his gaze fixed on the silver necklace tucked beneath her scrubs, a tiny cross that had belonged to her father. His expression changed so subtly that anyone else might have missed it. Grace didn't. "You know this?" she asked. Luca's eyes lifted to hers. For the first time, the coldness cracked. "No," he said. But he was lying. 3 days later, Grace tried to convince herself the night had ended when Luca was moved to a private surgical recovery suite under heavy guard. It hadn't. His presence remained in the hospital like smoke after a fire. Administrators whispered behind closed doors. Police avoided certain hallways. Men in black suits stood near elevators pretending not to watch her. And every time Grace entered a room, she felt the strange sensation of being protected and hunted at the same time. Then came the flowers. White roses appeared at the nurse's station with no card. Then coffee arrived during her double shift, exactly the way she drank it, though she had never told anyone outside the break room. Her landlord suddenly called to say an anonymous donor had paid 6 months of her rent after a building maintenance dispute. When Grace walked home after midnight through rainy Chicago streets, a black SUV rolled slowly behind her for 4 blocks. She stopped under a street lamp, soaked and furious, and turned around. The SUV stopped too. A window lowered. Luca Moretti sat inside, dressed in black, one hand resting casually over a bandage beneath his coat. He looked far too alive for a man she had nearly lost on an operating table. Grace walked straight to the car. "Are you stalking me?" His face was unreadable. "No." "Then why is your car following me?" "To make sure no one else does." "That is stalking with better tailoring." For a moment, rain filled the silence between them. Luca looked at her as if she had surprised him again. Not impressed him. Not amused him. Something deeper. Something more dangerous. "You saved my life," he said. "I'm a nurse. That's not an invitation." "No," Luca said. "It's a debt." Grace leaned toward the open window, refusing to be intimidated by the man every criminal in Chicago feared. "Then repay it by leaving me alone." His eyes darkened. "I can't." The answer was too quiet, too honest. It unsettled her more than a threat would have. Before she could ask what he meant, another car turned onto the street behind them. Luca's expression changed instantly. No panic, no hesitation, just a cold shift into violence. His driver reached for something under his jacket. Luca opened the door and stepped out, placing himself between Grace and the approaching headlights. "Get in," he said. "No, Grace." It was the first time he said her name. The car behind them sped up. Luca grabbed her hand and pulled her into the SUV, just as bullets cracked through the rain. The windows held, but Grace screamed anyway. Luca's arm locked around her shoulders, forcing her low as his men returned fire. The SUV surged forward, tires screaming against wet pavement. Grace's heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. Luca did not flinch. He looked out the rear window with icy focus, issuing orders in Italian, his voice calm enough to terrify her. When they finally stopped inside an underground parking garage beneath a luxury penthouse tower, Grace shoved him away. "What the hell was that?" "A warning. To you?" Luca looked at her bloodless face, then at the place where his hand had gripped her sleeve. His jaw tightened. "No, to me through you." That was when Grace understood something had shifted. Saving Luca had not ended danger. It had attached her to it. The penthouse above the garage looked like a place built for a man who did not expect warmth from the world. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, black and silver beneath storm clouds. The furniture was elegant, expensive, untouched. No photographs, no clutter, no evidence of ordinary life, just marble, glass, steel, and silence. Grace stood in the middle of it wearing damp scrubs and shoes stained with hospital antiseptic, feeling like she had stepped into a cage lined with luxury. Luca poured whiskey he did not drink. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "I'll do no such thing. There are men looking for you. Because of you." "Yes." The honesty cut sharper than an excuse. Grace folded her arms. "Then fix it." "I am." "By locking me in your penthouse?" His eyes moved over her face, lingering on the exhaustion beneath her anger. "By keeping you alive." Grace hated that part of her believed him. She demanded answers. Luca gave almost none. A rival family had attacked him. Someone had leaked his ambulance route. Whoever failed to kill him now believed Grace had heard or seen something during treatment. She hadn't. She told him that. He believed her. It didn't matter. In his world, innocence was not protection. It was leverage. At dawn, Grace woke on a leather couch beneath a cashmere blanket she did not remember accepting. Luca stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking softly in another language. His shirt sleeves were rolled up. His bandage had bled through. He looked powerful, controlled, and deeply alone. When he noticed her awake, he ended the call. "You should be resting," she said before she could stop herself. "So should you. I'm not the one with a bullet hole." "No," he said. "You're the one people are now willing to kill because of it." The guilt in his voice was so faint, she almost missed it. Almost. Grace returned to the hospital the next day against Luca's orders. He did not stop her, but he sent protection she did not ask for. 2 men appeared outside the nurse's entrance. Another sat in the parking lot. Inside, everyone treated Grace differently. Some avoided her, some whispered. Her supervisor warned her that news outlets had started asking questions about the mysterious nurse connected to Luca Moretti. By noon, her name was online. By evening, her face was on a local crime blog beside a blurry photo of Luca's SUV. By midnight, the hospital received its first bomb threat. Grace found Luca waiting in a dark chapel on the hospital's third floor, seated in the back pew beneath blue stained glass. She had gone there to breathe for 5 minutes between emergencies. Instead, she found the man ruining her life sitting alone in a place that should have rejected him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know. People are afraid. They should be. Of you." Luca looked at the altar. "Of what follows me." Grace sat several feet away, leaving space between them like a warning. "Then why come?" He did not answer right away. Outside the chapel, nurses rushed past. Somewhere, a monitor alarmed. Rain tapped the stained glass like fingernails. "Finally," he said, "because you look tired." The words landed too softly. Grace turned toward him, unsettled by how dangerous tenderness felt from a man like him. "You don't get to do that," she whispered. "Do what?" "Send armed men after me, drag violence into my life, then sit in a chapel and sound human." His jaw flexed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, not closer, not touching, just present, tall and controlled in the dim light. "I am not human in the way you want me to be," he said. "But I know what I owe." Grace rose too. "Stop calling me a debt." His eyes locked onto hers. For 1 second, the silence between them changed shape. Then Luca stepped back. "As you wish." That restraint, his refusal to touch her, even when the air between them felt charged enough to burn, stayed with Grace longer than his threats. The second attack came 4 nights later. St. Aurelia went into lockdown again after a gang-related shooting flooded the emergency room with victims. Grace was already 16 hours into her shift. Blood covered her gloves. Her feet ached. Her voice was hoarse from giving orders. She had just stabilized a teenage patient when the lights flickered. Then the backup generators failed. For 11 seconds, the entire emergency department went dark. When the red emergency lights returned, men with masks were inside the hospital. They were not there for patients. They were there for Grace. Panic exploded. Gunfire tore through the corridor. Grace shoved a young nurse behind a supply cart and dragged a wounded security guard into a treatment room. Smoke began seeping through the ventilation system. Someone had started a fire near the lower floors. The hospital became a maze of alarms, screams, smoke, and shadows. Grace tried to reach the stairwell, but 2 masked men blocked the hall. One of them raised his weapon. Before he could fire, a bullet struck him from behind. He dropped. Through the smoke, Luca Moretti appeared. Not in a suit this time. No polished control. His coat was open, his face streaked with soot, a gun in his hand and blood on his collar. Behind him, his men moved like a storm. Grace froze. Luca crossed the hallway toward her with terrifying calm, but his eyes gave him away. For the first time, she saw fear there. Not fear for himself. Fear because of her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Grace shook her head, unable to speak. The ceiling groaned above them. He reached for her, then stopped inches from her arm, as if forcing himself not to grab what he wanted to protect. "Come with me," he said. A blast shook the building. Flames rolled across the far end of the corridor. Grace looked back toward the treatment rooms. "There are patients still inside." Luca's face hardened. "My men will get them. I'm not leaving until I know." Something violent flashed across his expression. Not anger at her. Terror at the fact that she meant it. That she would walk into fire for strangers the way she had walked into blood for him. "You are impossible," he said. "I'm a nurse." "No," Luca said, stepping closer as smoke thickened around them. "You're a problem I can't survive." Then the ceiling collapsed. Grace remembered heat. Noise. Luca's body slamming into hers. His arms shielding her from falling debris. The world turned orange. And black. She coughed so hard. Her lungs burned. Luca lifted her from the floor, one arm under her knees, the other around her back, carrying her through the burning corridor, while bullets cracked behind them. "Put me down," she gasped. "No." Luca. His grip tightened. Not this time. He carried her past flames, past shattered glass, past armed men shouting his name. His face was cut. His shoulder was bleeding. His eyes never left the path ahead. And when they burst through the emergency exit into rain and flashing lights, Grace saw the impossible. The most feared man in Chicago looked like he had walked through hell and still didn't believe he had saved her. He lowered her near an ambulance, then stumbled. Grace caught him. For a second, he leaned into her touch. Then his control broke. Luca Moretti, the man everyone feared, sank to one knee on the rain-soaked pavement, one hand gripping Grace's wrist like it was the only real thing left in the world. "I couldn't do it again," he whispered. Grace knelt in front of him. Rain ran down his face, washing ash and blood from his skin. His breathing was uneven. His eyes were somewhere else, somewhere old, somewhere full of ghosts. "Do what again?" she asked. He looked at the cross around her neck. And finally, Grace understood. The secret was not just about her. It was about her father. Grace's father, Dr. Thomas Miller, had died when she was 17. Officially, it had been a car accident on an icy road outside Chicago. He had been a quiet trauma surgeon, loved by patients, devoted to Grace, always tired, always kind. He had taught her that saving a life did not require judging whether the person deserved it. But Luca told her the truth in the hidden safe house outside the city, hours after the fire. Her father had saved him 22 years earlier. Luca had been a boy then, the only survivor of a massacre that nearly wiped out a branch of the Moretti family. He had arrived at St. Aurelia under a false name with 3 bullets in his body and no chance of survival. Every doctor was warned not to touch him. Saving him meant crossing powerful men who wanted him dead. Thomas Miller operated anyway. He hid Luca's identity. He moved him through hospital records like a ghost. He kept him alive. And years later, when Luca became powerful enough to search for the man who had saved him, Thomas Miller was dead. Grace listened without moving. "My father died in an accident," she said. Luca's silence told her everything. Her chest tightened. "No, I was not powerful enough then to prove it." "You knew?" "I suspected." "And you never told me?" His face was pale in the firelight from the safe house hearth. For once he looked less like a king and more like a man waiting for judgment. "I thought staying away from you was protection," he said. Grace laughed once, bitterly. "You followed me, paid my rent, put men outside my job. That's your version of staying away." His eyes darkened. I watched from a distance. "That is not normal." "No," he said. "Nothing about what I feel when it comes to you is normal." The confession landed like a match in a room full of gasoline. Grace stepped back. "You don't know me. I know you work until your hands shake. I know you skip meals when the ER is full. I know you talk to dying patients like they're not alone. I know you wear your father's cross when you're afraid. I know you think courage means pretending you don't need anyone." Her throat tightened. "That's not love," she whispered. "That's surveillance." Pain crossed his face, but he accepted the blow. "I know." "Then stop." I tried. The room went silent except for rain striking the windows. Grace should have hated him. Part of her did. But another part remembered his arms around her in the fire, his body over hers when the ceiling fell, his voice cracking in the rain. The way he had nearly touched her in the chapel and stopped because he knew he had no right. That was the cruelest thing about Luca Moretti. He was terrifying, controlling, dangerous. But he was not careless with her. Not once. The betrayal came the next morning. Grace woke to find Luca gone, and her phone filled with messages. News outlets had released footage from the hospital fire. The images were everywhere. Luca carrying her through flames. Luca kneeling in the rain, Grace holding his face between her hands. Headlines called her his lover, his weakness, his secret nurse. Her hospital suspended her pending investigation. Federal agents wanted to question her. Her apartment had been searched. Then she saw the final message. It was from an unknown number. "Your father died because he saved the wrong boy. Now you will die because you saved the man he became." Attached was a photo of Grace sleeping inside the safe house. Someone had found her. Luca returned minutes later and saw the message in her hand. His entire expression went cold. "Who sent this?" Grace asked. "Adrian Volkov." The name carried poison. Volkov was the heir to a rival family, a man who had built his power through betrayal, blackmail, and public cruelty. He had ordered the hospital attack. He had leaked Grace's identity. He wanted Luca emotional, distracted, reckless. And Grace had become the perfect weapon. "You need to let me go," Grace said. Luca stared at her. "No. If I stay near you, people die. If you leave, you die. That is not your decision." His control frayed. "When your life is being used to destroy mine, yes, it is." Grace stepped closer, furious. You don't own me. The words hit him. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped. No, I don't. But his eyes said he wanted to. And that scared both of them. Grace left anyway. She made it 2 blocks from the safe house before Volkov's men took her. They didn't drag her into an alley or a basement. That would have been too simple. They brought her to an abandoned church on the edge of the city. Its stained glass broken. Its pews covered in dust. Its altar lit by dozens of candles. Volkov wanted theater. He wanted Luca to arrive and understand that this was not just violence. It was humiliation. Grace was tied to a chair beneath the ruined cross when Adrian Volkov entered. He was handsome in a hollow way, dressed in a white coat that looked obscene against the decay. He smiled like a man who had never loved anything enough to fear losing it. You made him kneel, Volkov said. Do you understand how rare that is? Grace lifted her chin. I made him live. Volkov's smile sharpened. That's worse. He told her things he thought would break her, that Luca had watched her for years, that he had killed men for coming too close, that he had bought the building across from her apartment, that he had buried anyone connected to her father's death, one by one, but left Volkov alive because killing him would start a war. Grace forced herself not to react. Then Volkov showed her the final truth. Ah, file. Her father's death had not been random. Thomas Miller had been murdered after refusing to reveal where he had hidden Luca as a child. He died protecting a boy he had saved once, and a daughter he never wanted near that world. Grace cried then, silently, angrily, without giving Volkov the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. When Luca arrived, he came alone. No army, no convoy, no performance. Just him, in a black coat, walking through the ruined church doors as candles flickered in the draft. He looked at Grace first. Not Volkov, not the guns pointed at him, her. His eyes moved over her face, her wrists, the blood at her temple. Something inside him went still in the most terrifying way. Volkov smiled. There he is, the great Luca Moretti, reduced to one woman. Luca did not look away from Grace. Let her go. No. Luca finally turned his gaze to Volkov. Then this ends badly for you. Volkov laughed. You came alone. No, Luca said softly. I came first. The church exploded into motion. Glass shattered. Luca's men stormed through side entrances and upper balconies. Gunfire ripped through the nave. Grace dropped to the floor as the chair tipped. Luca reached her through the chaos, cutting her hands free with a knife pulled from his sleeve. For one breath. They were face to face amid violence and candlelight. You came, she whispered. His hand hovered near her cheek, shaking almost imperceptibly, then pulled back. Always. A bullet struck the stone behind him. Luca turned, fired twice, and pulled Grace behind the altar. Volkov escaped through the crypt tunnels beneath the church. Luca went after him. Grace should have stayed hidden. She didn't. She followed, because the file about her father was still in Volkov's hand, and because some part of her already knew Luca would not come back the same if he killed Volkov only for revenge. The tunnels below the church were wet, narrow, and lit by emergency lamps. Grace found Luca at the far end near an old iron gate, his gun trained on Volkov, who was bleeding from the shoulder and laughing through pain. Do it, Volkov taunted. Kill me in front of her. Show her what her father saved. Luca's finger tightened on the trigger. Grace stepped beside him. Luca. His breathing changed. Volkov smiled. Yes, Grace. Save him too. That's what your family does, isn't it? Luca's face twisted with rage. Grace placed her hand over his gun. He did not lower it. Look at me, she said. For a moment, he couldn't. Then he did, and what she saw in his eyes almost broke her. Fear, grief, obsession. A boy still bleeding on an operating table. A man who had built an empire because surviving had cost too much. If you kill him like this, Grace whispered, he wins. Luca's voice was barely human. He took your father from you. And if you become exactly what he says you are, then he takes you too. The tunnel went silent. Slowly, Luca lowered the gun. Volkov lunged. Grace saw the knife first. Luca moved faster. The fight was brutal, close, desperate. Volkov slashed Luca's side before Luca slammed him into the iron gate. Grace grabbed a fallen pipe and struck Volkov hard enough to send the knife skidding into the dark. Luca looked at her, stunned. Grace was shaking, but her voice held. I told you I'm not weak. For the first time in all the darkness, Luca almost smiled. Police sirens wailed above. Luca's men took Volkov alive. That mattered. Not because Volkov deserved mercy, but because Luca had chosen something harder than revenge. In the weeks that followed, Chicago changed. Volkov's arrest exposed a network of corrupt officials, hospital board members, and federal contacts who had helped orchestrate the attacks. St. Aurelia Medical Center became a national scandal. Grace was cleared, reinstated, and then immediately took leave because every hallway reminded her of smoke. Luca disappeared from public view, but not from her life. He no longer sent men without telling her. He no longer appeared outside her apartment like a ghost. He asked before entering. He waited when she said no. For a man like Luca, restraint was not weakness. It was devotion translated into discipline. One snowy night in Boston, months later, Grace found him at a private memorial chapel overlooking the harbor. He had built it quietly in her father's name, funded a trauma wing at St. Aurelia, and never told the press. Inside, beneath warm candlelight, her father's cross rested in a glass case beside a simple inscription, "For every life saved without fear." Grace stood beside Luca in silence. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes. You should have trusted me. Yes. You still scare me." His eyes lowered. "I know." Grace turned toward him, but not in the way you used to. For once, Luca had no answer. She reached for his hand. He looked down as if her touch was something sacred and dangerous. "I don't want a cage," Grace said. "I don't want surveillance. I don't want your world swallowing mine." His fingers closed carefully around hers. "Then tell me where the walls are, and I'll stop before I reach them." That was not a perfect promise. It was not soft. It was not ordinary. But it was Luca trying to love her without owning her. Outside, snow fell over the harbor. Inside, the feared Mafia Boss stood beside the woman who had saved his life twice, once with her hands, once with her mercy, and bowed his head like devotion had finally taught power how to kneel. Grace looked at him and saw the darkness clearly. Then she saw the man inside it. And when Luca Moretti lifted her hand to his lips, he did not look like a king claiming what was his. He looked like a man grateful to be chosen. The final fire was gone, but the heat between them remained.